This was so idiotic that I had to get Bruce to make another statement specifying that I requested the clip from him and that I had permission to use it, though James did not have permission to share their email exchange. In his emails with James, Bruce explicitly states that he was responding to the claims James had made. There it is in red. But his viewers can't read, so they just ate up the fabricated story. Now, again, remember, I'm demonstrating conclusively that James is a pathological liar.
So there's a question here that maybe some of you are asking at this point. Is this approach by Farina, I mean, what do we call this? Like the pompous patronizing approach, you know, the snooty snobby approach, right? Is that effective, whether you're on the debate stage or not?
Yeah,
I call this an approach because this is purposeful. This is not a mistake, you know, that some people legitimately make, where they try to come across as erudite but accidentally come across as arrogant, right? Instead, no, this is on purpose. So then you have to ask the question, like, why do this? Is this effective? And the answer is no. You are taught in debate to do a couple of things. First, to rely on the components of rhetoric in your delivery. In other words, in order to be effective, you need to ensure that you track along what Aristotle referred to as pathos, ethos, and logos. These component pieces should shape your delivery such that you should win over the judges and the audience if you develop those components properly, if you track along those components well. You know what one of the components of rhetoric is not? Being a jerk. As a matter of fact, rudeness can cause you to lose the whole debate, even if you're actually the better interlocutor on stage. Why is that? Because these kinds of emotion-based verbal attacks cloud the very thing that should stand out, which is your principled argument, whatever that is. And because judges and the audience consist of human beings, and human beings are emotional creatures, the worst thing that you can do to get an audience to carefully consider what you have to say, even if it is correct and true 100%, is to attack your opponent and to even attack the audience. This is a horrible tactic to get people to listen to you, and it persuades no one. It certainly rouses your own base, but guess what? Virtue signaling is not debating. So
this is important because James also lies about science that goes over most people's heads. So by proving to you what a liar he is, you are now primed to realize how he is lying about all the complex details of origin of life research as well. This way you won't just nod your head.
I wish they would have done formal cross. This style of communicate, I don't know what this is. This is not tracking along a formal debate, and I know there's play in the joints, and you know, a lot of these things that we see on YouTube are not formal debates in the way that you would see something at the high school or college level, but I think this has strayed too far. This right here, this segment, is a rebuttal that has wandered into the wrong segment, which sounds like the beginning of a joke. A rebuttal and a closing statement walk into a cross-exam.
And assume James must be right. So let's begin. Let's begin with the textbook thing. Why would you tell this dumb lie, James? Why would you tell this lie?
You think you've been taught something about molecules? Okay, so there is a primordial soup model, and there is no understanding of what's happening in this primordial soup. And you talk to people, and this is exactly what they see. They talk about the primordial soup model in all of these textbooks. That's your question.
This is the primordial soup model. It just means some molecules in water. That's what it means.
Look, you were absolutely clueless on
James.
Polypeptides. You never gave me the coupling for that reaction. I want you to notice, I'm going to narrate. This is my time
James.
now. I want you to notice,
No.
he didn't answer the question.
Okay, Tour is now not answering the question. I mean, so if it's fair to critique Farina for not answering Tour's question, Tour is doing the same thing here. He needs to stay focused and answer the question.
And I invited him to come up to show me the chemistry, how this is done.
No, I
He
didn't.
did not. He did not. And now you want me
did.
to say, so now this is
No,
the question. The
I
question
showed
is,
counter
I
research
just
that
told
does
you
it.
the
He's just
primordial
confusing it.
soup model
James.
is nonsense, and this is in these textbooks,
You
and this is taught
that
over and
molecules
over
turning
again.
into slithering creatures is in textbooks? Show me the textbook. Show me the textbook that says molecules form into slithering creatures.
Because this is
Show it.
exactly the model that the model.
Okay, so I just decided to pause this exchange and move away and take a few minutes and just sift through the email exchange leading up to the debate. The link for the email exchange between Tour and Farina is in the notes of the original video. It's pretty wild, guys. And it seems to me, having read through it, because I'm watching this exchange and I'm like, man, like, what happened to turn this debate into what it actually became, right? And so I just figured I'd go back and look. But it seems to me as I read through it that there is just a fundamental lack of understanding when it comes to debate formats, and the purpose of debate. And I mean, I'm not critiquing anybody specifically here. This whole exercise is a bit of a mess. When you title your debates, which by the way, Farina was the one who suggested the title for the debate, you know, are we clueless about the origin of life? When you title a debate this way, it makes it unclear who shoulders the burden of proof. And it also makes it unclear what the various debaters' roles are. For example, in a debate that's titled, James Tour is lying about origin of science, well, then it definitely makes sense for Farina to do what he's doing right now, which is completely attack Tour. But when the title of the debate that you came up with is, are we clueless about the origin of life? Then it's now on you to answer the question as well. And so you have to do more than merely attack James Tour and his comments, even if Tour is incorrect on his views. And you demonstrate this as a debater on that stage. You still have not answered the topic question, which is a problem, because if you're not answering the question, then you're not doing what is necessary for you to win this debate. Tour in his opener at least made a case that origin of life researchers cannot provide an adequate explanation for the 5 compounds that he has listed on that blackboard. Hence why he wanted Farina to come up to the board and fill in some kind of process or explanation as to how you get those compounds. I mean, that's actually a pretty solid opening strategy. But Farina, with all of his references to papers, is simply attacking Tour, which again does not help him win this debate. He still needs to take the extra step and answer the topic question.
Molecules come together, these form higher organisms that come out of the water.
Molecules form higher organisms that come out of the water.
Yes.
Show me the textbook that you
I don't have the textbook. I showed you.
Because
There they
I
are.
showed
There
you.
they are. The smelly soup model. There, you have the list right there.
James, I showed
That's
you.
from my video. You have the list.
This is what the textbooks show. Ribozymes, autocatalysis, all
does
the
that
things
text?
that you
No.
pretend are real.
Go back to my slide. Go back to my slide. All right. Now don't change it. Now, which textbook were you referring? Because I said right there, it says miniature seed, prebiotic soup. Those are quotes from each one of
And
those
do they
books.
show
It's in there.
molecules forming a slithering creature? No, they don't, because that's a lie. And you're not going to run out the clock. How about the...
Well, so again, were this an ideal debate, Tour would have 1 or 2 quotes to back himself up here with regard to Farina's challenge. But then again, so would Farina, right? Farina could read a book cited by Tour and show that his terminology is not present in it. To the audience, that is. And then ask again, which textbook talks about a slithering creature or whatever Farina's issue specifically is. But no, instead we've got shouting. I quoted from those books. No, you didn't. That's a lie. The audience, as well as myself, are going to need therapy after this debate.
dozen people think? Is that what like a dozen people to you?
What I meant by that, the number of people that are doing the complex organic Sutherland counter type synthesis. This is exactly what Benner told you.
No.
Benner told you
People
that
all
it's
over
a
the world.
very
Benner
small.
told me. I have
No,
hundreds of
Benner
papers.
told you on the video that there's a small number of people that are still doing the Sutherland type of complex synthesis. He says most of the area is
Origin of
not
Life
doing that.
community is a boutique community. It's a small number of people. It's a dozen people.
It was in
That's what you
reference
said.
to
No.
the number of people that are doing the complex Sutherland type
The
synthesis.
origin of life community. The origin of life community. You're talking about the field in general. How about the Bruce thing? This was pretty dumb, right? He just took one of the guy's videos and stuck it in.
Because when I
Why'd you do that?
contacted Bruce, Bruce said to me, I don't even know what you're talking about. I was unaware of
Dave
this.
asked me
He
to
said it
comment
in the
on
email.
some of your
You're not
writings,
showing the whole email.
and
I have
specifically about what we are doing. And does this show?
no. Why don't you show the page? Why don't you show the page where he said, I had
this
no
show
idea that
prove
this
you
is
wrong?
there. Look, I published the whole email.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
you're only
here
showing
he
the one.
says that I.
Where is the moderator? Can somebody go find him? Is he on a bathroom break? Who is running the show at this point? Because this is quickly starting to sound like a jackhammer breaking up asphalt.
asked for
No,
the
but
video,
in the-
and he's talking about you. And then here you go.
No,
and
you don't want to show the one where
just
he
took
said-
one of the guy's
where he said,
videos
"I
and
had
stuck
no
it in."
idea."
I think he should
You're
apologize.
not
for this.
gonna address anything on life.
This was pretty.
You can-
This was a pretty dumb
Let's
lie.
try
This
to
was
have
a really
a dialogue
malicious lie.
instead of people shouting at each other. So
Uh-huh.
There you are. There you are, Mr. Moderator. Get it back on track, guy.
So maybe take turns.
I think an apology is in order for this lie, James. Pretty dumb lie. Pretty dumb lie to tell. I think we can all agree that we are establishing the pathological nature of his lying.
Which is not the thrust of the topic idea that you came up with, though. Right, Farina? Okay, fine. Establish that he's a liar. But don't forget to answer the topic question, though. My gosh, what a mess. I'm gonna need, like, aspirin after this one. Which of you in my audience told me to react to this? How could you do this to me? By the way, if you have not yet subscribed to the channel, please do so. Please like and subscribe to the channel simply because of the torture that you put me through. I'm kidding. I appreciate y'all.
Well, then you're blind. He just took one of the guy's videos and stuck it in.
Let's go back to the, we have 1 minute and 11 seconds left. 8 seconds.
Championship.
Well, it doesn't sound like I'm going to get an
1 minute and
apology
11
from
seconds.
James.
Okay, as far as this, he says that I called Jack Sostek a liar.
Yep.
I did. And Jack Sostek sent me an email. He said, you were pretty hard on me in that talk. And I said, Jack, I'd like to call you to apologize because I was wrong to do that. I said, give me your number. He gave me his number. I called him. We spoke about this. He said to me, Jim, if you would join us in this origin of life research, we would get this thing solved. We had a very good conversation.
Why'd you say this was a Nature
article? You totally made that up. Because if you had spoken to Jack Sostek, nobody made me apologize to him. I offered him my apology,
Let me
and
show
he
you the
accepted
primary literature, the journal Nature.
And I
Does this look like the
apologized
journal
to
Nature?
him.
And but you continue to call his work utterly, no, what did you call it? Ridiculous, utterly ridiculous.
Yeah, it is utterly ridiculous.
Yeah, but
when he says he's going to have life in his lab in 3 to 5 years in 2014, and now he says, I can't even make the RNA.
Who cares? Who cares? You lied about this. Look, the structures are...
Oh, no, that...
Who cares? Really? I mean, you know, forget about the shouting and talking over each other. Isn't that a worthwhile piece of evidence to consider? That an origin of life researcher made a claim that he would create life in his lab, and then he backed away from that claim saying that he couldn't do it? Don't you think that that actually intersects with the topic question? Oh, but that doesn't matter, guys, because Tour said something wrong and then he apologized about it later, which, by the way, is not a good look for Tour. But how does one somehow downplay the significance of the other thing? This is...
slide, you can speak to Jack Sostek. He said to me, Jim, that slide was not well done. That was a copy from another article in Scientific American.
The structures are
no,
correct.
Jack agrees with me. That was poorly done. There's no stereochemistry on that sugar. When there's no stereochemistry,
okay, I'm going
it's
to
not rival.
I'm going to call us
If there's
close
no
to this
stereochemistry,
part of the
not rival.
session. Let's move on. It's Dr. Tour's
2 minutes
Right.
to ask a question. Okay, my
to ask
second
a
question is,
let's also try to see if we can stick more to the science instead of diagrams.
oh, I would love to stick
Well,
to
that
the
was my
science.
only prompt for the lies.
All right.
It's important to establish
Polynucleotides.
that he's a liar.
Polynucleotides. You have to be able to make RNA. You have to be able to take this molecule and hook it together many, many times to have a dimer of RNA, abbreviating the base, this time as B, abbreviating the triphosphate as P3.
God bless these guys that can sit through this, and this, not only can they understand this, but it actually makes them passionate and excited.
What you have to be able to do is show me chemistry. I'm asking you specifically for chemistry, not a bunch of nonsense here. Show me the chemistry
Not a
to
bunch
get
of peer-reviewed
this
research.
reaction to go such that you get coupling between the 3' hydroxyl to this 5' site. So you need 3', 5' coupling to the exclusion of 2', 5' coupling to the exclusion of branching. Every article that you cited in your videos, every article that you could ever cite that shows this coupling, shows this scrambling, you get significant amounts of 2,5, significant amount of branching. And that's why this chemistry doesn't work, and that's why your own expert, Jack Sostek, even says that Benner's work, where he talked about this thing, was just hyped up. There was nothing there because he
jump in
says he
here?
went with the hype He did not go with the
2
right
minutes
coupling.
is-
Show me the
So-
chemistry.
2 minutes
It's funny,
is
show
over,
me
guys.
the chemistry.
Okay, so first of all, this is completely idiotic. Nucleotide polymerization has been demonstrated on Montmorillonite clay for decades.
Yes,
And-
with 30
hang on.
to 70%
Hang on.
2.5. I asked you for 3.5, which is what you need to have
You want
light.
to do me a favor?
Is anyone keeping track of this? Somebody out in YouTube land is, I'm sure. It does not help that both interlocutors keep shouting over each other. These various displays of emotion are undermining both opponents right now. And the moderator, I don't know what he's doing. He's probably watching the Ted Lasso finale.
I never know how to react when a white guy does the running man in front of everyone.
He's not helping at all. I'm going to be real with you guys. I don't know how much longer I can hang in here. Honestly.
Here, I want you to read the title of that paper there. It's by your buddy, Jack Shostak. He's done some research on this.
Yeah, I know. And Jack Sostek even says he cannot get it. Functional art, except for tolerance for non-inheritable 2.5. How much tolerance? How much? Montmorillonite clay is 30 to 70%.
What's the first word in that paper? Functional. So we're talking about RNAs that still have catalytic behavior, despite having a mixture of 2.5 and 3'.
Well, functional with regard to what, though? I don't know the ins and outs on this issue, but I do know that functional should be defined, or else we could be conflating terms in order to answer the question, which would be misleading in certain circumstances. But how are we to know that unless function is clarified a bit?
The amount of 2.5 to 3.5 is not 30 to 70%. If you have a 0.1%, you're okay, because you'll have runs, but not 30 to 70%. Show me the amount. Your guy Deemer never tells us how much is there.
James, look, the
And
research
Benner
shows
never told us how much is there.
functional RNAs. So it doesn't matter how much 2', doesn't matter.
Oh, it certainly
He's
does.
allowing them to
And what
look
about
like-
branching?
My God.
It's not there. It's not there. Nobody has ever done this prebiotically. You're going to be looking through your papers a long time. It's never been done. Without an
James,
enzyme, it has never
You are
been done.
completely clueless.
It's
This has
over.
been done.
It's over.
This is probably an elementary layman's question, but if one of the 5 compounds that Torq has proposed needs explaining actually has been explained, wouldn't Farina have a paper that shows that specific compound being manufactured in a lab somewhere, mimicking prebiotic conditions as Torq keeps specifying? And if it had been created, wouldn't the process of that compound creation be written out for the scientific community to see and evaluate, such that Farina could simply walk up to the blackboard and write out that process, chemically speaking? So why doesn't Farina do that? Don't you think this debate could be over if he just would provide one formula instead of falling back on claims about papers and their success? You know the bar for Farina. If the bar is set at clueless, right, then all he has to do is show that Origin of Life researchers have definitely answered one of the 5 challenges that Torq gave tonight, right?
You can't make RNA, there's no life. You can't make RNA, there is no life. You haven't made peptides, you haven't made RNA. It's over.
James,
You guys know not to do that, right? Those of you wanting to get into debate, don't scream, "It's over!" when you're supposed to be asking questions. I mean, you know.
has been demonstrated for decades on clay. You are literally pulling this out of your ass. This has been done for decades. You guys, none of you people know this research. None of you people know this research. You're just blindly trusting him.
All right, let's try to have some civility, please.
The adsorption and polymerization of nucleotides on clay minerals has been demonstrated for decades. James is lying, and people who are cheering for him have no clue what he's talking about. You're just blindly believing him. I'm sorry.
Okay, let's look at it on clay. Here is
Track this moment, because this is probably the moment where vegetables are about to get thrown at people.
Here is the reference on clay. Here is the reference on clay. Here, on Montmorillonite, what did he get? He got 67%. No, I've not read that paper. You read it. Tell me, how much 2.5 does he have?
I don't remember
All
every
right,
single
there we
detail
go.
of the paper.
You don't remember because you don't want to remember. You read the paper. You brought that into
what
place
RNAs do.
because it doesn't work.
Do you understand that
the
RNAs have
alignment is
catalytic
not right.
function? Do you understand that
No,
RNAs have
even if
catalytic
you have
function?
the wrong enantiomer, it doesn't work. Even Donna Blackman has said that in the papers
You
that
have
you
no
cited.
clue what Donna Blackman says. You quote mine her. You have no idea what her research is about. You just pretend to.
Okay, so there we go. I asked him to come up.
didn't track a single thing about this. Didn't. Did you? Did anybody in the audience track the
Here, and
Shostak
show me the
paper on
chemistry,
linkage
just like I
heterogeneity.
would do with a graduate
Still-
student. I said,
still
show me the
recognition and
chemistry.
catalytic
He
function.
did not.
I mean, you
Done.
can say that.
Done. You can't do this. You can't make
You
a
can
cell.
say
You
that,
can't
you
do
can
that. You
cheer,
can't make
but
a cell.
you're
It's
just lying.
over, buddy. It's over.
Game over, man. It's game over.
Wow. Lies and cheers. Amazing. Lies and cheers.
So
Incredible.
just from a chemical point of view, though, we would need to know what functional RNA meant.
Having
Function-
catalytic properties.
Function, I mean, because RNA has
Look,
many functions.
It still has
So-
That's exactly what I was saying a moment ago.
recognition and catalytic function. It lowers the melting point of the duplexes by destabilization, so separation can occur under reasonable
And
conditions.
what was the percentage? You got everything else written down. What was
James,
the
I'm
I don't
sorry
know.
that- I'm sorry
I don't
that I
know.
don't have an
You know,
encyclopedic
Benner's
knowledge
very
of
careful.
hundreds
He
of
would tell
papers.
us. It's
Okay.
in that paper because
But
that's
you're-
what Benner.
you're basically calling
Sostek got
Shostak
upset with
a fraud.
Benner because he didn't do it.
But-
Sostek would put that in the
No,
paper.
that's another great one. The Benner thing. Yeah, we're going to get to the Benner one.
Okay,
because-
it's time to end that part, but I want to just pause. To have functional RNA, it has to do at least three things. It has to serve as messenger RNA, ribosomal RNA, and
No.
uh,
Messenger RNA. Messenger RNA. You're talking about features of modern cells. We're talking about prebiotic
But
nucleic
ultimately
acids.
has to do that. So what function is my question did he show that it has to at least
I mean,
perform one of the three. Ultimately, it's going to have to perform all of them.
yeah, I mean, it's replication. I'm not sure exactly in the context of the paper, but he's saying that
I don't know why the moderator is jumping into the debate. This is reminiscent of Barack Obama-Mitt Romney debate where the moderator corrected Mitt Romney.
He did, in fact, sir. So let me call it an act of terror.
Can you say that a little
Start to
louder,
use
Candy?
the word. He did call it an act of terror.
I don't know what's going on, but because we are so way off. Like I'm just rolling with this at this point, as I'm sure everybody in the audience is. So I mean, having established that, there's another problem. If you don't know what functional means in the context of the paper, then why were you pointing to the word as if it refuted your interlocutor? It's hard not to see Farina, especially with his condescending attitude, as somebody whose mouth is writing checks that his papers can't cash. You know what I mean?
two prime linkages don't matter. As though you people have any clue what any of us are talking about. Oh, I know about RNA. No, you don't. You have no clue what either of us are saying. Deal with it. Answer the question. Anyone who thinks nucleotide polymerization to form RNA has not been demonstrated is clueless. It's been demonstrated by hundreds of researchers and is just
Show us.
canon.
Right here.
I
Here.
just showed you.
Do it. You got hundreds of examples. Show us. You won't come up.
What do you
won't
want
do
me
it.
to draw on the
You won't
board,
do it.
James? What do you want
You
me
won't
to
do it.
draw on?
Do it! Come on, do it!
Do it! Just do it!
This is not a debate, guys. You know that, right? I mean, we are right. Much respect goes out to Tour, and even in the face of Farina's very condescending, snooty attitude and rude behavior, clearly Farina is knowledgeable about chemistry and biology. But this isn't a debate at all. I mean, this is a circus. And if we had just kept to a more formal structure of debate, so much more effective conversation could have flowed through, so much more productivity, which is an argument for doing it in the right way. And I think you know that. I think those of you with me know that. I think anybody who's never seen a Wise Disciple video and has sort of broken down and analyzed debates in the past still knows it deep down in their bones. They just maybe can't articulate it as best as we can, right?
Yeah, that's why I brought a bunch of research James pretends isn't real, and you're all pretending to understand right now. Google? What?
Okay.
All right, let's go to the next round. Dave, you're next in terms of asking a question.
All right. So we've been talking about
Dr.
peptides and nucleic acids, so I'll give a prompt on this too. So let's talk about biomolecules. Amino acids are ubiquitous and even form in space, and Strecker-like synthetic pathways have been known for decades. Amino acids polymerize to yield peptides. Again, James has humiliated himself even tonight, claiming peptides can't form in water, no matter how many references I show him. Here are some of the papers that we've been talking about. He keeps trying to talk about side chains because he hasn't admitted yet that this does happen. Peptide formation with prebiotic chemical activators. There are countless studies generating this. So the objections, like the reactions from side chains, I'm very sorry, but they have been addressed, showing regioselective coupling even for lysine. When he objects to this, he's just lying about what the paper is about. Then don't forget condensation by wet-dry cycling, as well as totally alternate synthetic pathways that don't involve condensation.
Question? Anywhere? Question? Does anybody see is there a question? Question, can you hear me? Barbra Streisand. Is there a question on the horizon?
Next, plenty of studies show prebiotic syntheses of nucleotides, and their adsorption and polymerization on clay has been studied for decades. These catalytic surfaces also protect RNA from degradation. This type of...
3 rebuttals walk into a cross-examination. What do they order? Not a question! Not even one!
Chemistry has been taken out of the lab and shown to work in prebiotic analog conditions, primarily hot springs where biopolymers form efficiently and become encapsulated in vesicles. James ignores all of this research and just complains about aspects of experimental setup, like running reactions under argon, which is done specifically to avoid contact with the oxygen that wasn't present on the early Earth. Or he pretends prebiotically plausible reagents like DAP are not prebiotically plausible by only showing research from the 1950s instead of current research. He will wonder how nature knew to phosphorylate the 5' hydroxyl to get nucleotides, oblivious to research demonstrating that protection by borate minerals yields precisely that. In general, he ignores decades of research and just spews his script about how we don't know how to get these molecules. But we do, so let's continue talking about this.
Okay, so there were so many there.
What?
You know, this is called rapid fire.
I'm just
But there was
All right, so you cited this paper where they used sulfur 4. This is not just water, it has activation. Once you activate, it is not amino acids polymerizing in water. As soon as you activate...
So I'm not someone who is informed enough to comment on the very esoteric discussion that's happening on this debate stage with regard to chemistry or biology of origin of life. The only thing that I can continue to tell you is this is not a formal debate. This is not close. This has devolved into the kind of heated argument that you would see at a soccer match. Only the content of it is more academic, you know, except at times when it's not, though. Because even though most of us are not experts in this field, those of us at Wise Disciple recognize the parameters of a debate. And the bottom line is, when you have a topic like this, it is not enough to go after the character of your interlocutor. Unless somehow your interlocutor is the subject of the debate. But James Tour is not the subject of this debate. And so all of this is sound and fury. But when you run this exchange through the X-ray machine, so to speak, and you get a look at like the actual skeleton of the arguments themselves from both sides, you will see that Tour has laid out a case with some clear contentions. Okay, this goes back to his opening statement. This discussion period has done nothing to undermine those specific contentions laid out by Tour. Tour laid out 5 compounds that are necessary for life and said that there are no explanations as to how these compounds are formed in prebiotic conditions. And Farina clearly had an opportunity to challenge these contentions. But when Tour invited him to do it in this discussion period, all Farina did was claim that papers have answered Tour's challenges, but he never explained how. He just continued to assert that they had, and that is a huge problem for Farina.
It goes from being zwitterionic, it goes from being zwitterionic to being not zwitterionic. It functionalizes on the carboxylic acid. That proton gets freed up. That proton gets freed up on the amine, and then it can do the attack.
You're describing the
wait, I'm not done. No, it was, no, you said...
You never said,
that
it happens,
you
but
said
not
it
with
in your
lysine.
second series, you said with suitable activation.
Yeah,
That's
chemical
the key,
activation.
because they're no longer zwitterionic anymore. You said it was... No, you said peptide formation in water was exergonic.
I have heartburn. I think I'm going to call it, guys. We get the gist of this exchange, right? Look, I personally don't think this was as bad as it could have been. I do think that Torq started off well. You should definitely go back and look at his opening statement. I thought that was pretty solid. And I think that was Torq at his very best. But this discussion period was not very helpful to either interlocutor. In my opinion, it should not have even taken place at all. You can make the argument that the debate should not have happened at all. The only thing that the discussion period showed was that Farina could not provide a scientific explanation for any of the 5 compounds that Torq laid out. All Farina did was he kept pointing to papers and claiming that the papers explain it. But that's not good enough in a real exchange, particularly when you are asked directly by your opponent. Farina should have been able to not even write down his own formulations, but just bring up one of the paper's formulations with him and write down somebody else's formulations to answer Torq. This is the equivalent of Torq asking Farina to do some kind of complex math problem, and Farina saying, well, I don't have to because other people have easily answered that. Well, okay, if other people have, then why not just rehash their answer on the board? Well, I'm not going to do that because, you know, here's somebody else that has also answered that. So many people have answered that. You see how this works? It's not an answer. I would say, boy, I don't know. I struggle to judge this exchange because this strayed too far from the parameters of a formal debate, in my opinion. I don't even think these two guys understand what is required for a formal debate. And again, I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I just don't think at the end of the day, I should hold people to something they probably didn't even realize they were or were not doing. Having said that, I do think it's fair to point out that Farina did not do the work necessary to substantively engage with the topic that he himself actually came up with. He should have answered the question, are we clueless about the origin of life? He spent way too much time attacking Torq and his character and way too little time making any kind of case to argue the negative on the topic. And when it came time for discussion, when challenged, he simply failed to overcome the rhetorical power of Torq challenging him in the specific way he did with that blackboard. So I guess as I'm talking out loud, I am declaring a winner. Okay, I think Torq bested Farina. But what are your thoughts? Did you watch the whole debate? Who do you think won, Torq or Farina? Let me know in the comments below. What other debates do you want me to react to? Let me know that as well. I need to go for a jog or take a shower or something. I'm not sure what, but I will return soon with more videos for your consideration. And in the meantime, I'll say bye for now.
People, as in, I think that a lot of theistic answers appeal to this like teleological instinct we have in order to find not just mechanistic explanations and not just kind of causal explanatory theories, but reasonable ones. So if I were to drop this like energy drink can, then
is this new tonic. Wait at the camera.
Yeah.
Not,
oh yes.
We're not sponsored, but maybe one day.
But if I were to drop it, then there'd be two ways of approaching that. One is explaining that. One is to say, well, the force of gravity acted on the can, and all of the muscles in my hand unclenched, and there was an electrical signal that went from my brain to the hand, and that would be a kind of a mechanistic explanation, right? I can't say the word explanation like quite right. I always miss the L, but that would be a mechanistic explanation. And whereas a teleological one in terms of reasons or purposes, one might say, kind of broadly construed, would be that I wanted to and then I did. And those two types of explanatory hypothesis often run parallel in everyday life, especially when explaining human behavior. And I think the why is there something rather than nothing. One of the reasons I think that the kind of, oh, well, there was the Big Bang, or like stuff like that, or well, because we have this causal story that runs towards this whatever point in time the universe began at, etc., etc., etc. Why I think that a lot of the time that seems unsatisfactory, especially to someone with a sort of with this kind of teleological predisposition, is that it doesn't have this parallel sort of, well, what's the reason why it is the case? There's an underlying methodological assumption, I think, to basically all inquiry, which is good because otherwise I don't think inquiry would be possible, that we're going to have intelligible answers to whatever questions we ask. And I think that, why is there something rather than nothing is a perfectly sensible question. And I think that it tugs on this teleological instinct that we have. But something that I think that Hume raises as a possibility is just that our mechanisms of knowledge and sense acquisition simply aren't equipped to answer questions like this. So I think, to be honest, I think it's a bit of a cop-out.
It has to be a cop-out. I mean, this question is a sensible question, like you say.
Yes,
Why is there something rather than nothing? Everybody likes to ask that. Everybody likes to address that question. In a lot of philosophy and theology, I think, there's that sort of bell curve of intelligent questioning, which begins with, well, why is there something rather than nothing? It's like the most naive, simple, unintelligent question you can ask. It's just super straightforward. And then as the intelligence of the question raises, it's like, why is there a contingent series of cause and effect? But then you get down to the really, again, super smart, super intelligent, very meaningful question, and you're right back round to, why is there something rather than nothing? It's fundamental for a reason. I think that if you really reflect on the possibility of a world in which there's nothing, I mean, like a possible world, a way that things could have been, that's just empty. And there seems to be an empty possible world, and we do not occupy that possible world. And well, why? It seems like nothing is the neutral position, and that there being something is this sort of strange insertion into that space. Though I have spoken to atheists who basically ask questions like, well, is it possible for there to be nothing? What? I mean, is it not a contradiction to say there is nothing? If nothing is nothing, you can't say there is nothing, and so it's impossible to have nothing. And if it's impossible to have nothing, then there must be something. This is basically a way, I think, of putting forward what I think is the atheist's best bet in answering this question, in hypothesizing that essentially the universe is necessary. When you speak to a theist and they say, well, things exist because God brought them into existence, and then you naively ask, well, then what brought God into existence? They say, well, God doesn't get brought into existence. God is the special kind of first cause, which by virtue of being the first cause, the foundational cause, is itself not cause. That's fine. That's not an illegal chess move. You can do that. But I think a lot of atheists turn around and say, well, maybe the Big Bang, maybe the beginning of the universe is super special, which does seem a little bit like, yeah, okay, that's easy enough to say. But if you think about the fact that at the Big Bang, for example, the laws of physics just break down. They just sort of stop working, right? And it does seem like a very special kind of event in that way, which makes it sort of not seem impossible to me that there's some kind of weird way in which that can be separated from things that happen within the universe that finally arises, such that maybe the universe sort of necessarily came into existence, maybe it necessarily exists. I don't believe that that's true, but I think that that's basically the best option available for the atheists on this question.
I think that raises a really interesting point about this idea of necessity, right? There's an I don't want to there are theological reasons why one might argue that God is necessary. And I think there are decent philosophical reasons to argue why something might be necessary rather than nothing. In the sense that even in set theory, if you want to say nothing, you say the set of things, the empty set, the set of things that contain nothing. It's still
describing a thing.
Yes, yeah.
Because true nothingness, I think Aristotle defined as what rocks dream of.
So that's very poetic.
It's not just nothing. It's not. You speak to Lawrence Krauss, and he says that nothing isn't really nothing, and it's something, and you think, okay, fine, that's and that is actually really interesting, and there's some great science there, but we're not talking about the same thing. Or someone says, oh, there's not nothing, there's quantum fluctuations. Well then there never was nothing. I mean, if somebody says something like, if you take the Kraussian line and say, well, nothing doesn't exist, nothing isn't really nothing, I think that's just a version of saying that there can't be nothing.
Yeah.
That stuff just necessarily exists, because even when you have nothing, there's still something there. That's just a way of saying that there isn't really nothing at all. And so, that there isn't really nothing at all.
Yeah.
And so, if you've got your sort of philosophy cap on, anytime you hear this sort of scientific attempt to redefine nothing to be something, I think we have to recognize that what's really going on there is another kind of stuff exists necessarily kind of argument.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of difficult. You can really tie yourself in knots defining nothing. Because I remember posing this to a classroom of logic students, and being like, and asking, how would you define nothing? And they said, well, the set in which every proposition, or the universe in which every proposition is false. And I was like, well, what about there does not exist an X? And I was like, or an X such that F, like where F is whatever predicate you like. I was like, well, that would be true then. And it's like, oh god, yes, there's a true proposition in the nothingness.
Yes.
And I thought, it's kind of a fun little formal exercise.
Someone in a comment once said to me on YouTube, true nothingness would not contain the constraining axiom that something can't come from nothing. So like, why not? Why can't something come from nothing? Because if it's truly nothing, then where's the rule that says that something can't come from nothing?
The other thing, I really like that, because I feel like that's gonna come up a lot later, where it's like where our rules something.
Yeah,
and,
we'll do the laws of logic.
Yes, yeah. But the talking about possibilities, about whether there could be something rather than nothing, I think is very interesting, because it again, drawing back to this methodological point that Hume doesn't quite spell out, but I actually think with kind of modern ideas about possible worlds, we can think a bit more in a bit more detail about reasoning about possible worlds is kind of weird in and of itself. And I think that it's one of those things that aren't, if you wanted to, you could argue that all of our reasoning about possibility, again, it's grounded in this world, right? I can there's a camera over there, and I can imagine a world in which there is no camera, and I know that's possible because of all of my experience of worlds of rooms that don't have cameras in. There is an argument to be made that is really disanalogous to the situation of, well, could there have been nothing rather than something? It is true that there could have been nothing rather than something, in the sense that it doesn't seem to imply a contradiction. Well, unless you ask some ancient Greek philosophers, but let's just assume that it doesn't imply a contradiction. Then there is the further point of, well, just because something doesn't imply a contradiction, that may mean that it's logically possible under the rules of classical logic, as in you can form a model of it. But does that mean it's metaphysically possible? The universe could not have existed. What would it take to make that phrase true? How do we even go about investigating the possibilities there? Because normally, as I say, we're using our imagination. Can you conceive of a world that's different from ours, at the very least, right? Because let's not, if we're going to abstract from why is there something rather than nothing, to why is there, why does our universe hold the particular characteristics that it does. You can imagine a universe where, okay, it's not nothing, but it's just empty space, and that seems like it holds the same kind of question for the atheist.
It depends what we mean by empty space, right? Because when you say the possible world which contains nothing, and by the way, when we talk about possible worlds here, this is like a way of conceptualizing probability, right? It's it's a way that the world could have been, by the world I mean everything which is. I don't mean the Earth. I mean everything which is. And so a possible world is a conceptual tool to think about what was possible. So there is the way that people use the language, there is a possible world in which your shirt is blue instead of pink. That's how people talk about it. It's not there could be, the language that's used is, there is this possible world where everything is the same except your shirt is blue. And okay, so there's a possible world in which there's nothing. But then even just imagining that, I'm kind of imagining this big orb that exists somewhere that's just empty and black, but the world itself still seems to kind of exist in order to contain nothing. I mean, if it truly was nothing, what is that sort of possible world contained in? Even conceptually, if there's no abstract object, if there are no numbers, if there's do numbers exist in this possible world?
Yeah, I suppose the closest you come to is be there's a model such that it only contains the empty set.
Yeah, but you're still talking about a model, right?
Well, yes, exactly. Yes,
and so that's why I think that the best shot the atheist has here is to use this kind of language to say sort of, when you really start imagining the possibility of there being nothing, it's sort of not possible to do.
Do you not think we still have a problem in that as in whatever, sure, there may necessarily exist something, but we have a lot more than just something. We have a lot more than just there is a thing that is true. And I think and my response to that particular worry is to throw some gentle skepticism on the idea that our possible world's reasoning stretches to the possible existence or non-existence of our universe as a whole. Partly because I don't really know how my imagination is justified to hook onto the different possibilities there. But I'm open to being convinced, because also we're in really dangerous territory with that sort of response, because possible worlds reasoning is so useful for the rest of the world. So there is, again, I think there's a genuine non-trivial problem for an atheist answer to this question if they want to go down the route of, well, how reliable is our possible worlds reasoning at the level of the whole universe, where we have to cut the distinction fine enough that we get around this question, or in other ways, express the intuition that I think that a lot of atheists have, that this question is in some way dodgy, without getting rid of possible worlds reasoning in much of the rest of the reasoning, because that is, it's such a useful tool. Like, it's in everything from probability to epistemic logic to just like planning. Like, can you imagine planning without thinking about possibilities?
Yeah.
So it's a high stakes game. This why is there something rather than nothing question.
How much sleep do you lose over this particular question? Because I must admit, for myself, it's one of those super naive sounding philosophical questions that I think is really worth like reminding oneself of just how serious a challenge it is, and how incredible it is to think about stuff. Like, sometimes I'm just like looking at an object. It could be like the wood on this chair or something, and it's just like there's just like stuff that exists, and it seems like that stuff could not have existed, and it's such a simple, naive thought, but it's really like it's incredible. So I think about it a lot, in other words. But I mean, does it trouble you?
Yeah, I mean, I go back and forth on it, right? Because I think it's a very natural question to go back and forth on how philosophically troubling it is.
Yeah.
But partly because like stuff is like water to a fish. It is like, what would it mean to not have stuff? But you're right. It is remarkable if we are considering the open possibility that there could have not been stuff, or at the very least that this stuff could have been like totally different. Like, the world, the idea that the world could have contained contradictions. That's really interesting,
right.
And that's some like Graham Priest is a logician who has set up this remarkable system of paraconsistent and paracomplete logics, which are logics where basically you get rid of the law of non-contradiction, or you get rid of various other laws of like completeness and stuff. And then he'd say, well, in some possible worlds there'll be, or in some impossible worlds, which is another fascinating term that comes up in these paraconsistent logics. Yeah, the world is sometimes is contradictory, and I think, okay, yeah, that's fine, and that's outside the realms of what we would standardly consider logically possible. But could it have existed? And this is where my intuitions run out, and I go, well, actually, I don't think I have a firm grasp on the ways in which I think the universe could be. Like, think about if we're thinking about possible worlds alongside this kind of probability vein, so they're not exactly the same, but like they're clearly related. If I'm like rolling a die, or six-sided die, I can be like, right, there are going to be six relevant possible worlds open to me, and I know that because of all of the other times I've observed dice, but we haven't observed universe formation or universe being, and so I kind of, when I attempt to justify why I think there could have been something rather than nothing, or why I think the universe could have been different on this kind of not just intra-universe objects could have been different, but the universe fundamentally could have been different. I struggle to like, I have this strong intuition that it could have been, and then I really struggle to justify it to myself.
Yeah.
So it does keep me up at night.
Thinking about probability, like I often think about like if I roll a 5 on a die, to think about like what the probability of that was, I kind of think, well, if I ran that back and did it again, how many times would it have come out as a 5? And if I say, well, every time I ran it came out of 5, then it's like it had to happen. That's a way of sort of thinking about probability.
Yeah.
When I think about the universe existing, so okay, well, let's run it back, and how many times when we run it back does a universe run what back?
Yeah, exactly.
I think from where?
Yes, where are we going to replay this?
What? Where does it start? I mean, especially if time itself is like a physical property of the universe. This question of like, running it again and seeing if it works. It's like, I mean, Hume in other contexts talks about the fact that we don't have other universes to compare.
Yes. Yeah.
We just don't have any kind of like control group or point of comparison. We have just no idea, and so like it's difficult for me to even conceive of what it would mean to imagine there being nothing, and yet at the same time, like you say, it's so obvious, it's so simple. It's like, of course there could have been nothing.
Yes, well, I think part of this is that there is vagueness in the concept of could, like just impossibility in general, because and we know that and often this is solved by a modifier, so you can say, okay, logically possible, metaphysically possible, or physically possible, and I think I have a broad idea of what's physically possible, and I have a much clearer idea of what's logically possible, because that's much neater and kind of, you have fewer rules to worry about. But metaphysically possible is a real grey area. I don't know what's metaphysically possible, and I'm not sure that I could know. And then, there are philosophers that try to know, and, best of luck to them. But certainly I really struggle to justify my sense of what's metaphysically possible. So why is something rather than nothing? I will admit, I have no answer. But I also would tentatively suggest that no one in principle has an answer. Like, as in the as in, if you want to take, the theist idea of, there's something rather than nothing because God created it. I mean, there's a kind of, again, to your bell curve thing, the kind of silly atheist response, which is, well, why is God necessary? And then the kind of middle, the big hump, which is the sort of, engaging with all of the kind of theological literature around divine necessity, which I think is very interesting in its own right. And then getting to the other side and being like, but like, why is God necessary? Because it doesn't seem like it's contradictory to say that there is no God. And if that's the benchmark, because that's the benchmark we used for discussing whether the universe could or could not have existed, then it seems like we are at the same problem.
And the sort of ontologically minded theist might want to say, well, God not existing is a contradiction because of the meaning of the word God. I mean, God is the maximally great being, maximal qualities, or God is the greatest conceivable being, and that means you must conceive of him existing, or whatever. And my regular listeners or viewers will know that I give a lot of credit to the ontological argument, more than most people do. I think it's brilliant. I think it's great fun. But in the same way that, like, okay, well done, clever clogs, like, you sort of got this concept of God, which is kind of difficult to imagine not existing, even like conceivably. I would say that there's a similar sort of thought you can have about nothing. Yeah, as a materialist, right?
Can you imagine nothing?
Whether you're a materialist or not, it's sort of like, well, okay, if something is possible, then you should be able to conceive of it happening. So now conceive of there being nothing. Oh, look, you can't do it, because as soon as you're conceiving of anything, it's not nothing. Therefore, nothing is not possible. Therefore, to your question, why is there something rather than nothing? It's like, that's like asking, why is God necessary? It's just like, it just has to be that way by the definition of something, like by the definition of even conceiving of possibility. Now, I don't think that would work. I think because somebody's going to listen to that and they're going to be like, yeah, but like, man, there could have been nothing. They just could have, right? And then some people will want to say to the God question, I know you've got this clever ontological argument that sort of defines him as necessary, but like, he could not exist. He just could.
Well, I think there is real vagueness around what the meaning by could. Not to be all the kind of stereotypical philosopher. Like, what do you mean by that? But what do you mean by could? Genuinely, there is ambiguity in the scope of could. Because I say, classically it seems like could is the possibilities that are left when you have imposed certain constraints on a set of models. So say classical logic imposes certain constraints on models, and physical laws would impose certain constraints on models if you wanted to be compatible with physical laws. But then, I say, this in-between realm where it's like, well, the laws of physics could have been different. And it's like, well, could have been within what constraints? Because logic, I think the trouble is that physical possibility isn't sufficient to show this could have been nothing rather than something proposition, because physically, if you within physical laws, it doesn't seem like that's the case. But logical possibility is almost seems like it is not connected enough with the universe to be all that, like, if we say logical possibility according to classical logic is just the same as like non-contradiction, and if we say it is not contradictory that there would be nothing rather than something, that doesn't seem to have the same pull as when someone says there could have been nothing rather than something. So it strikes me that then we must need something slightly stronger than that, at least on first glance. I might be wrong, but so it seems like we are grasping for some sense of could, some sense of possibility that is that does more than logical possibility, but far less than physical possibility. I don't know. Again, so this is again. I think that it would be fair to say that this is almost a cop-out answer, because it is saying I'm in disagreement with the question. Or at least I think the question requires further clarification. But I do think it's very interesting, and arguably it is a genuine question that atheists can't answer.
Yeah, I mean, atheists can try to answer it, like with some universal necessity thing, might not be satisfactory, but likewise, theists try to answer it, and it's up to you to decide whether you think that's satisfactory. I mean, they always have an answer to this question, but the question is whether that satisfies you enough, and for many it does. I mean, even if you are a theist, it's still like pretty amazing that like the universe exists. That's still something to sort of pause and think about and wonder about the possibility of there having been nothing. I mean, I guess for the theist, there's never nothing in the sense that there's always the something of God. Like the nothing they're imagining everything coming out of is like physical nothing. You know, there's no material things. And yeah, I mean, maybe that's their way out of say, well, yeah, no, you can't conceive of nothing, but you can conceive of there being no material stuff, and it's out of that the universe sort of is brought into being by this non-material entity.
A very interesting thing that I think this also touches upon is the fact that we are so much happier, just intuitively, and I'm not suggesting this is wrong, it's just kind of an observation. We are much happier to accept a metaphysical grounding that ends in the immaterial than that ends in the material. As in, and I think this might be because we can conceive of material things not existing in a much more straightforward way. But yeah, this idea of, okay, well, what's the beginning of material stuff? And you end up with the immaterial plane, be that kind of platonic or theistic or whatever, what have you. And then even I think that the question then, oh, well, why was there immaterial something rather than nothing? For some reason, and I don't know if this is just naive intuitions, like I am less troubled by that question. It seems so much easier to smuggle in necessary existence in the immaterial than the material.
Yeah.
And again, but there is the possibility that this is just because we don't have direct access to the immaterial. In quite the same way that we do to the material. It is much easier to imagine the necessary existence there, whereas we can disprove necessary existence for intramaterial world objects, because we've seen things come in and out of existence.
Yeah, I think I know what you mean. We've spoken about this before, I think, this sort of explanations terminating in immaterial or material things. We were talking about free will, and it's sort of like, well, why does the brain do this? Why does the hand move? Why does the neuron fire? Whatever. And you keep wanting to ask, well, why did that happen then? What determined that? What determined that? And if you get back to a point where someone says, oh, it was because of the soul, it was the immaterial self that did it, people just go like, okay.
Yes, exactly.
And it's like, okay, we just end there.
Yeah, and that is prima facie really weird that we do find that satisfying. And there is the question of asking whether we are justified in being satisfied.
It's almost as if we imagine these non-material things as not having like mechanisms which can be asked about in that way.
Yes, one thing is that I think that there is potentially, I think, a kind of a tendency towards being satisfied with agential explanations as the end point, because like in everyday life we often are, right?
Yeah.
If again, to take the thing of me dropping the Newtonic me saying, oh, I wanted to drop it and so I did, tells you basically everything you need to know. But it is weird, on the train ride here there was a really cool example of this, where there was this like 5-year-old sitting across from me on the train, and she was trying to colour in her unicorn colouring book, and one of the pens had ran out of ink. And she said, she put this in the most fascinating way. She turned to her dad and said, "Daddy, the pen has lied to me." And I was like, that's amazing. That's like, that's agential bias in explanation, just like in front of me.
That was incredible. Yeah, well, because they say that of children, that children sort of have like agential preferences in explanation. If you ask children, why do rocks exist? And you give them the option, does it exist because of, some insert physical explanation, or do rocks exist so that the bears can scratch their backs? Kids always prefer the bears scratching their back explanation. So atheists have used this observation as a sort of atheist argument to say that, we have this like natural sense to this natural want to improperly attribute agency where it doesn't belong, because obviously the real explanation for the rock being there is because of the physical explanation. But look at the silly children saying that it's because the bear wants to scratch his back. That's what religious people are like when they're like, why does the world exist? Oh, so that the big man in the sky can have his good people. But the thing is, like, you can also use the same consideration in the other direction to say that, well, why would humans have this this tendency to believe in agential explanations if they weren't like somehow more appropriate or more proper? And in fact, the theists will even say that the analogy is wrong, because why does the rock exist? Is it so the bear can scratch his back? Well, no. But is it because of the the atoms bumping into each other, blah blah blah? Well, kind of, but also no, because for them ultimately it was an agential explanation. It was just another kind of agential explanation. It was God,
Yeah, it's also, I think that we have to be reasonably careful. Similar to what I was saying about the possible worlds thing, we have to be pretty careful about how much we undermine our own demands for explanatory hypotheses and our own reasoning faculties. Because another problem that people raise for well, not so much atheism, but for a monist materialist understanding of reality is the idea that we'll end up undermining our own reasoning faculties to the point we can't believe in truth.
Yeah.
And that is, that's a genuine philosophical worry, right?
Which we'll talk about.
We'll get to.
We're going to get there. Perhaps we should move on, because otherwise we'll be here.
How long have we been nattering about? Why is there
God knows.
something rather
How long?
30 minutes.
30 minutes,
How many
ladies and
questions
gentlemen.
do we have?
Too many to count, so we'll try and speed things up just a little bit. Okay, question number 2. What do you do if you're not getting enough fruit and vegetables? I can take this one, actually.
okay.
That is where today's sponsor, AG1, can help you. AG1 is a daily, convenient nutrition.
No, thank you. No, thank you.
It's a lot of people
Don't make it
find that quite troubling. You might say,
and of about turn that seems to be so linked to the need for Christianity as a foundational story for our culture and that kind of thing. Maybe start with you, Glenn, and then come to Alex.
I think in one sense, the Tom Holland thesis is unremarkable and quite modest in that Christianization is 20 centuries of Christianization has had a profound impact on our moral sensibilities, and it's even had an impact on the way we see other sources of moral intuition in the West. I think that's actually quite a modest position to take on things, and quite widespread. Whether you're against Christianity and you're Nietzsche and you think, yes, Christianity has done a number on us all and it's a bad thing, or whether you are agnostic about these sorts of things like a Tom Holland is, or a Larry Seidentop, or
I suppose I'm asking, why is it resonating so much then? It's not new necessarily, and it's fairly modest in its claim, but it seems like everyone's picking it up suddenly, and I wonder what's changed for it to become so resonant.
I think he wrote it in 2019, and I think if he'd written it 20 years earlier, that's when kind of the end of history was kind of being proclaimed as this, okay, we win, modern liberal Western democracies are the future, everybody will get on board, and it's plain sailing from here on in. And I think that there was the conceit that there's a post-war consensus, prosperity is on the up, stability is on the up, peace is reigning, and you could almost believe that everything's getting better in a kind of a Steven Pinker sort of sense, and I think in the last 20 years from there till 2019, we've gone through some incredible upheavals and a lot of people questioning just how obvious liberal Western democracy, democratic ideals are. I mean, one reason for that might be 9/11 and then the 9/11 wars, in which, okay, let's just remove the Taliban and Afghanistan will become an egalitarian utopia, or we'll just remove Saddam Hussein and modern Western liberal democracy will just reign. And I think we've had to wrestle in lots of different ways with those geopolitical issues. I think de-Christianization has happened in America in a quite profound way. 40 million Americans left church this century. And there's kind of a sense of, with institutional Christianity and believing Christianity in some senses in the West in the rearview mirror, I think there's been much more of a sense of people missing what they once had, and the Dominion thesis sort of naming that. I think at low tide you sort of see what the sea had done in a sense that at high tide you have no idea about the shaping influence of the sea. Low tide actually might reveal that.
Low tide being a metaphor drawn from Matthew Arnold's Sea of Fate that has gone out, and only then do we see
the melancholy long withdrawing
how
roar.
that Sea of Fate shaped our...
And of course, tides come back in again.
so it's been said.
That's a fun sort of rejoinder, isn't it?
But even if they don't, my point is, at low tide there are things that you see what lies beneath, and I think people have seen sort of anti-woke backlash as well. You know, there's a sort of progressivism that might be shorn of Christianity and become quite authoritarian, and people might be concerned about that. There's an anti-woke backlash that looks at that, and they call them the woke, and they actually want the power thing and the dominance thing. And so yeah, people have become. They've seen that the story of the West has run out a little bit, and they're wondering, is there a grand narrative? And Tom Holland is giving them a historical narrative.
Do you broadly agree with the way Glenn sees that?
I think so. I mean, with Ayan in particular, I think she's dealing with two things at once. She recounts a very personal depression that she had fallen into, and it's an old story that religion can help you sort of find that, or I should say relationship with God. At the same time, she's deeply worried about politics, and I think that New Atheism fails to deliver on its promises. You know, this sort of humanist utopia where everybody's acting in accordance with reason and we all live in harmony, and all this just didn't emerge. And especially politics in the past 10 years, I hate when people say, like, you know, especially given the current climate, as if there's ever been a time in history where you can't say such a thing. You know, there's always something going on. There's a world war, there's a pandemic. But I do think that the influence of mass immigration, which does seem genuinely novel, has caused a lot of people to suddenly be confronted by people who believe completely different things to them, and they're forced to sort of reassess what might have been the defining characteristics of their belief system. And a lot of the time, you know, if the air is something that you don't really notice, I mean, you talk about it being the air you breathe and it being, you don't even notice that it's there. If something comes along and essentially starts sort of changing the nature of the air, starts smelling of something a bit different, then you start to notice it, you know. And so I think that it's kind of just a cultural moment. And one thesis is that the thing that we lost is belief in Christianity. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not, but I think a lot of people are attracted to it as a plausible option.
Okay, well that's helpful and really helps to frame, I think, the conversation we're going to have now about whether it's plausible, this idea that obviously Tom Holland, that you especially in The Air We Breathe, Glenn, have given us, that ultimately many of the core values that most 21st century liberal Western people hold to and live their lives by fundamentally are irreducibly Christian at some level. The Air We Breathe obviously is your way of saying we almost don't notice this in our culture. We haven't, up till now at least, realised. But now perhaps you're pointing out that, as you say, some of these things need to be recognised and see that there is a source and so on. Why don't we start with compassion? Your book deals with about 7 different topics, but compassion, I think, is one of the easiest to get a grasp on because there are some very specific ways, examples you give of the way that the early Christians inculcated what you believe are the kinds of values around kindness and compassion that we now take for granted. But maybe sketch out that and then we'll see what Alex has to say.
Yeah, well, let me begin where Dominion begins, with the cross. And in my book I talk about imagining myself into the shoes or into the sandals of a Roman centurion at the foot of the cross. And you really are dealing in a world of a very steep hierarchy of dominance, in which the slaves are absolutely at the bottom and the slave's death is the extreme penalty. And who should show up on that cross but the God of heaven? And it's the Jews in particular who are proclaiming that God has shown up on this cross, and of all the people to say the word God, you know, they're saying it with a weight that goes far beyond anything that the Romans were used to. And here is the great story that, according to Scripture, according to believers, you know, here is the highest figure descending to the deepest depths to have the greatest effect on the most number of people for the longest duration. Here is an unimprovable story of compassion, because I think, naturally speaking, it is survival of the fittest, and therefore the weakest are cast off. And here is the sacrifice of the fittest for we the weakest, so that we the weakest might survive and thrive and pass on a compassion revolution. And I think it really was a compassion revolution. Theresa Morgan often notes that a very common aphorism back in Roman times was, every day do something to help your friends and harm your enemies. And we all resonate with the first half of that, and the second half we go, yikes, you know. And we distance ourselves from that second half, but I think that second half makes perfect sense. in a brutal world of scarcity. It makes perfect sense in an evolutionary frame if you're just thinking about in-group amity and out-group enmity. It seems to perfectly describe nature in that sense. And that's why Nietzsche called this the transvaluation of all values. That you have the highest figure descending to the deepest depth in order to have compassion on us, and it birthed a compassion revolution in people who are taking that story very, very seriously. And things like charity, the way we think of charity today, hospitals, the way we think of hospitals today, orphan care that you've already mentioned, the way that we think of orphan care today, and then the abolition of things like the gladiatorial games, or the abolition of pederasty, the abolition of infanticide, and absolutely on the statute books, the first people ever to outlaw this practice it's close to a human universal. You know, Tacitus speaks of some German tribes that don't kill their offspring, and that was remarkable to him. But exposing infants, largely girls, the disabled, was just a very common practice. And now I
just explain what exposing means for those who perhaps aren't familiar with the terminology.
Right, leaving them in a rubbish dump to die of exposure or be taken by dogs, or putting them down a well, or drowning them in rivers, killing them. And I think there's an example of a moral intuition that has gone from certainly it might be grubby, it might be unfortunate, it can be explicable and excused, though, in a sort of a Roman frame as in a time of scarcity, this is needs must. But I don't think any of those kind of I don't think any of those justifications fly with us nowadays, and I don't think Rome itself was going to bring any of those reforms about under its own steam, given its own kind of moral and spiritual resources. I think it's definitely Christianity that has brought those about. And there is an example, I think, of some compassionate moral intuitions that ground themselves in some moral progress. And it is certainly Christians who are at the forefront of that.
Okay. Thoughts, Alex?
Well, there's a lot to say, right? I mean, like I say, I don't want to the sin I think both sides, as it were, commit on this issue is, I think, an overemphasis. Is to say that in the same way that you might say exposure in the ancient world, it does seem to be that we have records of Christians being the ones who are sort of anti this, who are sort of the antidote to exposure. And of course, yeah, happy to grant that. I just don't want to overstep the influence of Christianity in particular over the entire development of the Western tradition. In the same way, I might want to talk about the way that the church has stood in the way of a number of important instances of progress towards the West today. And I don't mean moral progress in an objective sense, I just mean movement from where it was to where it is. But you then wouldn't want me to overstep and say, therefore, the church has been the greatest roadblock and Christianity is evil and terrible. So I just don't want to overstate the case. My biggest problem with Christianity as responsible for these developments is its attachment to Judaism. To the extent that in the early church, Marcion famously thought that the God of the Old Testament could not be the same God of Jesus. He produces this text called the Antithesis, where he compares the doings and sayings and doings of the Old Testament God and Jesus and says these cannot be the same kind of person. And as long as you've got this attachment to this Jewish tradition, I find it very difficult to square how you have these kinds of condemnations that Christianity allows people to have of Roman practices without them similarly indicting the God that I'm told is the God that sort of came down into the figure of Jesus. They sort of have this excusability with the Jewish God. Now you might say that the very means by which they're able to look at the Jewish God and say these are things which trouble me and things I don't like, is essentially Christian. But if that's the case, then you're kind of left with a paradox as to what you're talking about when it comes to Christian values. If you want to agree with what I'm saying, which is that those are still present in the Old Testament, then you kind of become a bit of a Marcionite in saying that, well, the only thing that matters is Jesus. We can just kind of ignore the Old Testament, say that was wrong, and that doesn't matter. Or if you need to own it and not be a Marcionite, not be a heretic, then you need to offer an account for how that wasn't wrong when Yahweh was doing it, and how it's okay for Jesus to enter into that world and not be seen as this sort of fundamental negation of the Jewish religion. Whereas when he does it for the Romans, it's a negation as well. Also, like, you know, it's quite easy to pick on specific examples. For example, why do the Romans invade Gaul? You know, we have Julius Caesar's own words as to why he invaded Gaul. What are some of the reasons? Do we know? Well, one reason he gives is that the people there essentially are practicing human sacrifice. He includes this as one of the things that these people do, which, you know, sort of carries some of the justification for invading. Now, of course, in his heart of hearts, Julius Caesar probably just wanted Gaul for himself, but he at least appealed to this notion. Now, I could easily say, you know, look, there is this, you know, popular Judeo-Christian tradition, which has this sort of, which is totally okay with human sacrifice. The famous story of Abraham and Isaac, of course, Abraham doesn't sacrifice Isaac in the end, but it's the willingness to commit, and indeed the sacrifice of his own child, in reverence to this sort of strange ancient philosophical belief that they have, which we would never recognize today, that you should sacrifice your own children on behalf of your philosophical conviction. Also in Exodus chapter 22, verse 29, there's this very strange injunction to sacrifice your children to God, which is like immediately renegotiated, where like God says, you know, as with the lamb. Please, pull it up. And there's a lot of debate about exactly what that means. Some people think that this actually would be an instance of you will, I forget the term, but you know, sacrifice someone else in their place, but on the 8th day, you give your firstborn to the Lord, as you do with animals as well. While you're looking at that, I'll give you another example, because that one's a bit more controversial, but you know, I could easily point to it, especially as an ancient reader, looking back and saying, like, look at what was present there. Of course, Christianity itself is predicated on a human sacrifice, which is the sacrifice of Jesus. Now, I could say, look at this strange intuition that nobody thought, you know, like, nobody seems to sort of have a qualm with this kind of thing. Of course, in some Old Testament passages, Israel does end up having a qualm with human sacrifice. I think that's a renegotiation of principle. But I could say, but look, then you have this Roman tradition, which looks at the human sacrifice of the Gauls and says, no, that's terrible, we're going to invade and we're going to civilize them. And they see, so the sort of respect for the sanctity of humans and the abolition of human sacrifice, we're really indebted to the Romans for that. I think that would just be a bit too simple. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it absolutely would. And this is why...
Did you find the verse?
Yeah. Are you talking about Exodus 22, 29?
Maybe I've got the verse wrong. What does that say?
Exodus 22, 29. You shall not delay to offer from the fullness of your harvest and from the outflow of your presses.
That can't be it. What's next?
The firstborn of your sons you shall give to me. You shall do the same with your oxen and with your sheep. 7 days it shall be with his mother. On the 8th day.
On the 8th day?
Oh, sorry. On the 8th day you shall give it to me.
The firstborn. In the same way that you do with the oxen and the sheep.
So they were ransomed, and I don't know what the price was, but that was the cost of that life was given towards the temple as money.
Well, that's what they say, but in that particular instance, it's
even within Exodus.
You're doing elsewhere in Exodus.
Okay.
Let's not get caught up on that verse. There's some,
this is my issue with I think you're going to the Bible in a way that's alien to the way that anybody has ever gone to the Bible. Like to go into a verse and take out of it as a timeless principle that stands by itself and probably could cause somebody to kill their son. It's just not the way. I mean, you know Christians, you know that they don't read their Bibles that way. You must know Christian history, you know that that's not the way that Christendom has read the Bible in that way. So what, are you right about reading the Bible that way? And the rest of
what I'm doing is I'm showing it's a bit too simple to do this, right? Like I'm trying to demonstrate, because obviously the sort of approach that I'm taking here, you will see as illegitimate, and I think is illegitimate to some degree. I think it's got some
even within Exodus, but
yes. But then Exodus is a series of sort of renegotiations over scriptural history. I mean, I'm not the first person to think that particular verse is an instance of command for human sacrifice that survives into the biblical tradition that is then renegotiated. Scholars, debated, of course. But what I'm saying is, I could do that, but I think it would be too lazy. What we need to do is look at the overall picture that we get from these stories. What is the picture that we get from reading the Old Testament and this God? And what is the picture that we get of Jesus and his relationship with that God?
That might be a helpful place.
And where does that give us these ideas of compassion and equality?
So I mean, the big picture thing, without getting into the weeds of the Exodus thing and that overstuff.
And you're going to go to the first page of the Bible, which I think might actually be the second page of the Bible.
Okay. I'm actually going to go to Genesis 22.
Oh,
I was going to go to Abraham and Isaac. A wonderful proclamation.
All right, let's go there, and then we'll look at the bigger picture.
I mean, so the whole issue is Abraham is promised a seed. He and Sarah are totally childless. And after barrenness, miraculously, they finally have a son. He is the seed of Abraham, which is utterly messianic terms. He is the heir of the cosmos, the hope of the world. Here is this child, and then God goes and tested Abraham and says, Abraham, and he said to him, here I am, take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, go to the land of Moriah. Mount Moriah is where the temple is, so a mountain in the region of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. Now, even within Genesis, you're thinking, but he's the hope of the world. He's the heir of the cosmos. He's the seed of Abraham. And he's being told to be sacrificed, and somehow through that sacrifice, what? Because the whole world is going to be blessed through this famous golden child. And he's to be sacrificed as a burnt offering, which is a sacrifice of atonement, on a mountain in the region of Jerusalem. As the story progresses, the son has the wood on his back, the father has the fire and the knife, the tools of judgment, and he's trudging up a mountain in the region of Jerusalem on his way to become a sacrifice of atonement, this one who is the seed of Abraham, who is the heir of the cosmos. Abraham says, we will worship there and then we will come back to you, which the New Testament picks up as he seems to have some kind of trust that through sacrifice and out the other side, somehow, the chosen one will come back to us. And obviously in that moment, the angel of the Lord intercepts judgment and says, now I know that you fear me because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. And he provides the ram in the thicket as a substitute for Isaac, the promised child. And so on that occasion, the ram is sacrificed, but Abraham had said a lamb will be provided. And so the whole thing ends with verse 14. Where is verse 14? So Abraham called the name of that place, this mountain in the region of Moriah, the Lord will provide. And it is said to this day, on the mountain of the Lord it shall be provided. What shall be provided? The lamb, the true son, the seed of Abraham, the heir of the cosmos.
Yeah, Jesus.
And they knew which mountain it was going to be on. And so this is a Christian way of reading the text, but I think it's a Christian way of reading the text that it is utterly consonant with the Hebrew details. But the way that Christians read Old Testament texts is not that, oh, here's an injunction. Abraham was told to do this very strange thing that, as you say, the Lord says, it never entered my mind to think about human sacrifice in the past. And yet, narratively, we are being told something about Christ and Him crucified. And this is the way that Christians read Scripture, right?
Yeah,
not as Abraham was told that, so I guess I can kill my son.
Of course, yeah.
But and we take the details seriously and we take them through the cross.
Many scholars see this as kind of a mythological retelling of the story by which human sacrifice came to an end. The practice of human sacrifice got replaced by animal sacrifice because at some point in our anthropological history this occurs, and many people see this as
not in the Bible, but
they see this as an encoding of this in the biblical story, that this is what it's described.
They're welcome, but within the world of the Bible, that's not the world that the Bible describes.
I agree. I think it depends how you're reading it, right? If you're reading it as a Christian, of course that's how you're going to read it. What I'm saying is it's too simplistic an approach. I'm demonstrating the simplicity in my very own approach there.
So where we've got to is that you're just aware here, Alex, that there's a number of different factors that might go into the emergence of the values we have around kindness and compassion in today's world. And you're not in any way dismissing the fact that Christianity was an important motivator in various aspects, but you're questioning this whole idea that it's too simple to say it just came out of the Bible. The Bible is a very complex.
Not just that, but also that, like, we talk about compassion, and compassion is such an ambiguous term that, by the way, obviously does crop up in other traditions, to the extent that if you're just talking about compassion, you can't be talking about something which is uniquely indebted to Christianity. The thesis is more specific than that. It says that our modern sort of conception of Western values comes from Christianity. So I don't just want to know where compassion, in fact, if I were just to grant that, okay, this idea of compassion, maybe even, the idea that all human beings have the imago Dei, and they do what worth for that reason, and that's what gives us this, antithesis to exposure and that kind of stuff. We're talking about Western values, right? And when you say Western values to somebody, and you say, well, what are the principal values of the West? If you were to ask a scholar or you to ask someone on the street, what defines Western values, do you think? Do you think that they would say compassion, consent, maybe they'd say equality, but I think they'd say things like this. And I wonder if in listing some of these things, you can think, or perhaps provide, and people listening at home can think of what might be a biblical or church tradition grounding for any of these things. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom for free sexual encounter between any two consenting adults. Free market capitalism is really important to the development of the West. Military and colonialism, nationalism. These are the kinds of things which I think actually define the West of the past few hundred years, and I don't think any of them have a grounding, let alone a unique grounding in Christian principles.
Oh goodness! I mean, certainly the first 5 things you mentioned are unthinkable without having come through centuries and centuries of Christianization. Was freedom of speech the first thing you sort of mentioned? I mean, that was absolutely hammered out in Protestant Catholic disputes. John Milton coming very strongly for freedom of speech, and then from dissenters from the Church of England wanting to have the freedom to be able to express their own views, and eventually sailing across to America and there you see some profoundly Christian history behind why does America have a First Amendment that the United Kingdom does not. It's the sort of question that you cannot answer without consulting Christian history and Christians doing things that they certainly interpreted them as acting for Christian purposes. That's, yeah.
I mean, I was going to move us on to equality, which I feel is kind of part and parcel.
Okay, I think it's worth pointing out. I guess briefly, I would consider that in the same way that you might use something like the abolitionist movement, which you would see as sort of, which we'll get onto shortly, I'm sure, but like sort of, emerging in a Christian culture, like fine, but there are sort of 2 theses here. It's either that you've got this sort of Christian worldview which exists as the biblical stories from which it grew, and then the early Catholic Church, and then you've got the Protestants coming along, and you've either got this story of like a flourishing of Christian values into freedom of speech, or you've got this story of a kind of disintegration from this original idea that you certainly don't get ideas of like freedom of thought and freedom of religion and freedom of speech from the Bible. That you can be put to death for believing, for worshipping the wrong thing, right? We definitely cannot ground in the Bible the idea of freedom of speech and freedom of religion.
In theology, the difference between speech and violence, like on a naturalistic worldview, is there a great difference between speech and violence? Whereas on a theological view, like the idea that Jesus says, "Put away your sword, for those who live by the sword will die by the sword," and then the only sword he gives to the church is the sword of the Spirit, a spiritual sword. What is that? It's the Word of God.
Yes.
And then the idea of missionary encounter all throughout medieval Europe was to go armed with persuasion.
Yes, you write about that in the book as well, right?
I think that is part of the intellectual genealogy.
What I'm trying to explain here is that I see sort of two stories here, right? Like, if freedom of religion, as we sort of consider it today, is essentially a Christian idea, which I find extremely strange, reading the Bible in particular, then it would make sense that it sort of develops over the history of the church. But if freedom of religion is actually a sort of a principle which is asserted against the Christian tradition, we would also expect it to come as sort of at the, like somewhere in the story of going from a sort of a fledgling Jesus movement into an early church, into a Protestant Reformation, and then as people begin to sort of wane on the authority of Christianity, they then start establishing these principles for themselves. And I think you've described exactly how these things did come about. People sort of began to realize that their own interests weren't being served by the church in the case of the Protestants, and they decided we want to be able to assert our own views here. Same thing happens in America, where there's disputes between churches and state, and Jefferson famously writing about the disputes that they have, and these are put in place, these protections, as much to protect the church as to protect the people who are sort of trying to not attend that church. But I think what we're seeing here is a sort of disintegration and an assertion of your own sort of self-interest, essentially.
I mean, if I were to try to summarize this, Ali, is it that you're concerned that Glenn is passing off as quote-unquote Christian, things like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, not because it's tied inherently to the biblical witness, but because the circumstances that happened historically around the church led to people developing these ideas, not necessarily because they somehow find their seed in...
Especially, I know that Glenn has a lot to say about the concept of rights, And it's true that you get sort of talk of rights and conceptions of rights dating sort of, back to sort of the 11th, 12th centuries, maybe even prior to that. But clearly the kinds of rights as are embedded into the Western framework today start to emerge.
Let's talk
in
about
the
this,
17th and 18th century.
This is where I wanted to go.
And I think that those rights are an assertion of self-interest.
Okay.
They're not a flourishing of religious tradition. I think that they are essentially a result of conflict that people are trying to protect against.
We will come back to that. We'll put a pin in that and come back to it, because I think this neatly moves us into the next area I was hoping to kind of get into, which is equality, another key value that Glenn, you say, has its foundations in the Christian story. Obviously, your view is, and perhaps you can elucidate some of this now, that obviously that was worked through by theologians and the church and into what we might call a modern Declaration of Human Rights or whatever it might be, but that somehow that was unthinkable, as you say, without the Christian story that ultimately gave rise to it. Alex, I think we're going to hear why he feels that's a stretch too far. But make the case first for equality as a fundamentally Christian idea.
Yuval Noah Harari makes the argument that equality is a fundamentally biblical idea generated from a belief in God and souls. But he then goes on to say, but if we no longer believe in God and souls, then what do we do with this idea of equality? So I think that the thesis that Christianity has shaped our moral intuitions is made from lots of different directions. There are people who think Christianity has shaped our Western values, and it's not a good thing. I think Tom Holland, for instance, is the sort of person who thinks, oh gosh, I do believe in the human rights thing, and I now see the dependence upon the Christian thing, and if I might as well be hung for a sheep as for a lamb, and so I'm going to dive into the Christian thing. Now, that leaves me with the job of, is there a link between Christian faith and equality? Declaration of Independence.
Enough.
Bijou.
Oh, no cambié los tires.
Smack my bitch up.
cloth cut different, I'm a stand-up guy. Keep the whole world in my hand and I ain't even gotta try. Lie to you, why? Sheesh, I'm just keeping it real. If the piece ain't enough, then I still got the steel. I'm out here in these cities, my bitch sitting pretty, collecting all this cash, worry about my own busy. Big bro, keep that glizzy. Little bro, keep that chopper. Anybody wanting beef, getting flipped like a whopper. Keeping it real. I'm just keeping it real. If the piece ain't enough, then I still got the steel. In these cities, my bitch sitting pretty, collecting all this cash, worry about my own busy. Big bro, keep that glizzy. Little bro, keep that chopper. Anybody wanting beef, getting flipped like a whopper. Real.
Everything.